I'm going first because as innovative as my organization is, we haven't moved to Prezi yet. So I'm going to let him wow you, and I'm just going to do the normal. So I want to talk about what if we can make the impossible possible? What if we could find a cure for Alzheimer's? Or figure out a way to capture CO2 from power plants and convert it into usable product so utilities actually do something about CO2? Or what if we could figure out a way to educate the millions of children that have no access to teachers or school? Or what if we could figure out better ways to predict earthquakes and save thousands and thousands of lives? Or what if we can actually figure out what makes people inherently happy and come up with a tool or process or technology to make sure everybody in this world is happy? And at XPRIZE, where we launch big prizes to get the world to focus on our challenges, we believe we can make the impossible possible every day. And all those things I talked about are things that my department is working on at XPRIZE, developing prizes for. Prizes can really help make the impossible possible. And prizes have been doing that for 300 years. Over 300 years, actually. In fact, one of the earliest prizes was 300 years ago when the British government put out a competition to help people figure out where they were on a longitudinal basis. Fast forward a little bit, Napoleon had to figure out how to feed his army. Shocking, he was invading a lot of countries and he couldn't feed his army, so he put out a prize for food preservation. And then we have commercial flight because of prizes, or a whole series of prizes that led to our commercial flight. And Lindbergh flew across the Atlantic back in 1927 in pursuit of a prize. And something really crazy happened after that prize won. First of all, 30 million Americans saw the Spirit of St. Louis, his plane, in the year following it. And there was a 300% increase in pilot applications in a single year, a 400% increase in licensed aircraft, and within 3 years, the number of passengers on commercial flights increased 30 times. All because of a prize, or a series of prizes. And then back in 1996, we at XPRIZE brought back prizes with our commercial space flight prize, which was the first privately funded spacecraft to go into space. And a lot happened since then. First of all, the winning technology, the winning ship, is actually hanging in the Smithsonian Air and Space next to the Spirit of St. Louis, kind of cool. The day after it was won, it actually got a Google Doodle, which might even be even cooler. But if you look at the United States, at least, the U.S. NASA is relying on commercial spaceflight solely to resupply the International Space Station, while they rely on government-funded spacecraft to go do other missions like Mars. So why are prizes important? And you heard a lot of people today and throughout this convention talk about specific innovations. And what I really want to do is I want to talk about an innovation tool, which are prizes. So why are they powerful? Well, first, they focus the community on a single challenge that you have. Let's look at some quick numbers. When you put out a prize, you get the world's greatest minds to help you figure out a solution. And you don't care if those people have been in that industry for 20 years or 20 minutes, as long as they can solve your competition. And so if you look at some numbers, we had an automotive insurance X prize, which was to get 150 miles per gallon equivalent, and we had 136 teams from 11 countries. Or our Qualcomm tricorder, which is a handheld health diagnostic. If any of you saw Jack and Drake talk today, he's actually competing for that. 40 teams from 9 countries. And you can see these other numbers. So instead of when you just go out and you say, okay, I have a couple $1 million, I'm going to go invest in 1 or 2 companies, you put a prize out there, and they spend their own money to come solve your challenge. Whoops, sorry, I went backwards. Prizes are great because they help you leverage your investment. As I just said, if you go out there and you put $2 million into solving Alzheimer's, you're going to invest in 1 or 2 companies and hope that they find a solution. But if you put a prize out there, the teams are spending their own money. And you get some amazing leverage. That commercial flight prize, $25,000 prize back in 1919, that's about $400,000 today. They had all the winning teams spent in aggregate over $400,000. So for $25,000 investment, you just got $400,000 in R&D. Or our Ansari prize was a $10 million prize. The winning team actually spent $26 million. You're going to ask, why the heck would they do that to win the prize? And in aggregate, they spent over $100 million. So we generally see 10 times in aggregate R&D investment from the teams competing for a prize. Think about this. If you do a grant or a contract, you're investing a couple $1 million and you're getting a couple $1 million worth of work. Or you could do this and you get hundreds of millions of dollars worth of work. But probably the most important aspect of the power of prize is that they democratize innovation. What do we mean by that? Well, think back to that grant or contract I just talked about. If you go out there and do that, you know your solver community, right? You're putting out an RFP or a tender or whatever it may be, and you know generally who's going to solve that, right? And they're going to give you a great proposal, and you have a general idea of what they're going to do. So you're going out there and you're identifying it. But if you do a prize, instead of finding that needle in the haystack, you're letting that needle find you. And you're going to touch populations that you never knew existed. Remember that longitude prize? Everybody assumed it would have been a ship's captain or an astronomer, clockmaker. The food preservation prize, candy maker. That commercial flight prize, 25-year-old flying fool who had been flying for 2 years. And everybody had been flying so much longer, just couldn't do it. And how did he do it? He threw convention out the window. Whereas everybody else was building planes with 2 or 3 engines, he built a single-engine plane. His theory was, if I go down over the Atlantic, a second engine's not going to help me, right? So let's take a risk. Or our energy-efficient vehicles, high schoolers didn't win it, but they got to the semifinalists. And our oil spill cleanup, which was to drastically improve surface oil cleanup after the Deepwater Horizon spill a few years back. Tattoo artists didn't win it, but still did 200 times better than the industry standard, which had been around for 23 years. A tattoo artist. Now let me ask you this question. If I gave you $2 million to do any of these things, would you have ever invested in any of these folks? My guess is the answer is going to be no. Because 1, you didn't know they existed. 2, they didn't know they could do this because they had never focused their efforts on it, right, until somebody came out and said there's a prize. And so prizes truly democratize innovation, and they let the world solve your challenges. And by the way, all this, and you only pay the winner. You just pay the winner. Simple, right? Everybody's like, oh my God, you're like an infomercial. This is too good to be true. The reason teams compete is because it's not just about the money. There's lots of reasons, in addition to the prize purse, why teams think it is worth their while to compete. And so I'm going to get a little technical on you for a second. So, and if I had Prezi, this wouldn't get messed up. So when you make an investment somewhere, you have some investment threshold that you're thinking about, right? And you say, okay, there's some market incentives and some non-market incentives, and I gotta meet that investment threshold with these, right? But sometimes you can't achieve that, right? And the reason you can't is sometimes there's a regulatory hurdle, or there's some technical hurdle, or there's a public perception hurdle. And, excuse me, and a prize can help solve those. Prizes identify the true market failure and attempt to address them. So why do teams compete? Oh, we're not getting anything. Oh, here we go. So teams compete for glory and prestige, or interesting work. That tattoo artist just cared about the problem, said, you know what, I can solve this. Or legitimization of industry or activities. Our commercial spaceflight, only governments put planes in space, right? Private companies don't do that. You put a prize out there, money started flowing into it because it legitimized it. Or the competition resources, that oil spill technology prize I talked about, each of the 10 finalists got to test at a U.S. naval base. And it cost us $200,000 per team to compete. And they spent very little to participate in our prize. But they got this independent, third-party, verified data that they can use to make their technologies better. Media attention, they could use our brands. They go out and they say, I was part of this competition. Money starts flowing. And then, of course, the prize purse. And you hope those incentives make you pass your threshold. So this is all great, but there are a few things you need to keep in mind. And I'm always happy to chat about prizes. But just so we quickly end, you need to define a problem and not a solution. You need to say, you know what? I want this thing to do A, B, and C, and I definitely don't want it to do X, Y, and Z. The second you define a solution, you kill the power of prizes. You need to make it audacious but achievable. If it's too achievable, people are going to be able to win it tomorrow. You actually want to challenge them. But if it's too audacious, remember they're spending their own money, they're not going to compete because it's too hard and they don't see the value in it. I'll give you an example. Typical US example. So when we did our Ansari XPRIZE, we originally said the teams had to go 100 miles up. And we did the thermodynamic blah, blah, blah calculations that you astrophysicists would know much better than I do. And we realized it was too difficult. Nobody would compete. So we changed it to 100 kilometers, which to us in the US makes no difference, right? Still 100. And the teams were more willing to compete. You got to make sure you offer a clear measure of success. Teams need to know what they have to do, and it has to be objective. The plane has to go to this height twice in 2 weeks. You do it, you win. You don't, you lose, right? And you need to tell great stories. That media attention is huge. And finally, you need to make it rewarding and simple for teams to compete. Meaning, there has to be those other additional incentives besides the prize purse to make them want to compete. How are you going to get that candy maker, that flying fool, that tattoo artist, that high school team? How are you going to get them to solve your problems? And so I will leave you with this. What do you want to make possible? Or as we say at XPRIZE, what do you prize? So I'll leave you with that. Thank you.
I'm just going to ask you a couple of questions, a bit of interrogation.
Sure, of course.
What I wanted to ask was, first of all, who actually puts up the prize?
Sure. So there's lots of organizations out there that do prizes. At XPRIZE, we're a 501c3 educational nonprofit. That's an IRS tax code. So for us, we get corporations to give us money, Qualcomm. We get philanthropists. Our oil spill cleanup was sponsored, and our current prize is sponsored by Wendy Schmidt of the Schmidt Family Foundation. And sometimes we get governments. DOE has put some money, the U.S. Department of Energy has put some money into our prizes. Now, as a 501c3 nonprofit, we don't keep any IP from the competing teams, nor do the sponsors. And so people that are doing it for us are doing it for three reasons. One, they're doing it because they believe in the mission of whatever that prize is going to solve. Two, they do it because it solves an industry challenge for them. And three, totally selfishly, they are very close to the teams throughout the whole process, and we often see sponsors eventually invest in the team. It's almost like a good deal flow for them, right? They know all the quirks of each team. They know their solutions work. So if you think you're like a VC, instead of going out and screening all these people, it's already screened for them.
So I have to ask you a really, really important question. I'm just thinking of poor old John Harrison. John Harrison solved the longitude problem. He was a clockmaker, and the British government, I hate to say this to you, being British, but the British government gave him the complete runaround and never paid him the money. You always pay the money, right?
We always pay the money. We always say...
I'm just checking for you, ladies and gentlemen.
We always say you have to launch a competition above the line of super credibility, right? So that teams know the money's there. And we will not launch a competition until every dollar is funded prior to us launching it. Because in the middle of a competition, we can't cancel it, right? Or people have already spent their own money. That also means we can't really change the rules. So a good prize is a huge investment from a research standpoint. When we design a prize, it takes us about 9 months. We interview about 150 experts, do all-day hands-on brainstorming sessions, because we have one shot to get it right. Now, of course, legally we can change things and sometimes have to work with teams because something might not be perfect, but we try not to.
So it's like the Bourne Supremacy or something like that. The day they do it,
yes,
you give them the number and say, it's transferred now.
Yes. In full disclosure, we've actually had to cancel a prize in the past because the market moved much quicker than we expected. We had a genomics prize where you had to sequence the genomes of 100-year-olds, because how cool would it be to know what's in the genomes of 100-year-olds? And throughout the process, we realized genome sequencing went from 3 billion to estimated 1 penny in 2021. And we were asking for like $10,000. And so we just said, you know what, it's not worth it. But out of that came an amazing repository of DNA material that researchers are now allowed to use under certain circumstances, and a protocol of how do you test DNA samples. So it was okay. But we always make sure there's a lot to it to make it worth our while.
Okay, very good. So let's turn to Peter Harvey now. Prezi, I mean, a truly pan-European startup. So what does it take to build a global success from Europe in the way that you have? Would you tell us about it?
Absolutely.